Welcome to stage 13 of Misspoke, a cycling podcast going out during this period of coronavirus. There's quite a rumbling going on in the background, and I've said to you before, I do this podcast in my garage, and I'm quite near the garage door, and beyond the door there is a road. Now, it's not a main road, but it is surprising to me the number of cars that go past and the noise that they make. Now, I don't really notice it in the house, but in the garage, where there isn't adequate soundproofing, they're actually quite noisy. Anyway, I hope it doesn't interfere with your enjoyment of this podcast. And I'm going to start stage 13 with another one of my ever affectionate monologues, and this one is called the S-1. So anyway, they say that the right number of bikes to have is N+1, which is like one more than you have now. But they also say that it's really S-1, which is one less than it takes for your wife to divorce you. Well, I should know. She divorced me. And it was all because of my cycling. She said I spent too much time on that bloody Strava and chatting to my mates on Facebook about bikes and shit and kit and stuff. Well, that's not true for a start-off. It was her. She started it, never giving me any time, and moaning and going off with her mates to have tea and lunch and stuff. We had some good years while it lasted. No, we didn't. That's not true. She always hated me. And I always hated her, truth be told. We only stayed together for the kids, as they say. Only we never had any kids. She went off in the end with this bloke she met on Friends Reunited. Do you remember them? It's gone now, but it was like Facebook. You could meet all your old school friends. I mean, who'd want to do that? Not me. Anyway, I never had any friends at school, truth be told. I was always the odd one out, never got picked for the footy team. I hated school. Why would I want to meet that lot again? No chance. I've only got 2 bikes now. I had 5 before she walked out on me with this bloke she met on Friends Reunited. Did I tell you that? I had to sell the others to pay for the sodding divorce. She cleaned me out. I've got nothing now, just those 2 bikes and my tools and shoes and kit and stuff. I said, we'll split it. And she said, are you having a laugh? Why would I want that shit? And she was right, really. It's rubbish, most of it. All worn out and torn and smelly. She doesn't do my washing anymore. Not that she ever did. She was useless as a wife. Mind you, I wasn't much better. Always drinking all the time and hitting her. No, that's not true. I made it up. It was never proved. I wish she'd come back. God, I loved that woman. Knew her all my life. Not at school, obviously, but still. And then she left me, and she said it was because of the bikes and stuff. But that wasn't true, was it? It was really because she never loved me, ever. She loved that bloke she met on Friends Reunited. God, I miss her. Cycling's not the same without her. No one in the club talks to me. They never did, really. I'd do anything to get her back. I'd sell both bikes. Well, one anyway. If you see her, say I miss her and I've sold all my bikes. Would you, please? And now, a little short story. This one was written a couple of years ago, as you may tell by some of the references. But I like to keep it that way. It's called Lumbar Puncture. Jeff turned left and soon the road started rising. It had been warm, almost hot in the valley with the strong sun and little cloud. But as he climbed higher, the sun slipped behind the trees and the temperature fell. Jeff didn't mind. He wore a base layer beneath his top and the exertion of climbing kept him warm. He settled into a steady cadence and kept his head down, watching his Garmin and occasionally glancing at his feet. His right leg was stronger, and he noticed that his left knee jutted outwards on the upward pedal stroke. But he felt comfortable and believed he could hold this pace to the top of the pass. The trees were thicker now, tall pines close together, and he could see little as he glanced to right and left. A few other cyclists had passed him, some heading down, some up, but he had seen no one for the last 10 minutes, and there were no cars. The road was smooth and clean, and his carbon rims sliced through the air. Beneath his helmet he wore a cap facing backwards to protect his neck. The close fit also stopped the sweat from sliding into his eyes. The occasional chain rub and the squeak of tyre on tarmac was the only sound to be heard. Jeff's mind wandered. He loved this time, while cycling. His mind could focus on a particular topic, turning it over and over, or else it remained blank. All energy and brain power directed to his legs, heart and lungs. He reached down and took a sip from his bottle and reached into his pocket for a fig roll. The crumbly sweetness and sticky fig seeped into his bloodstream and gave a spark of extra energy. He watched his cadence and heart rate on the Garmin and scrolled through the screens. Time, distance, speed, average heart rate, meters climbed, calories burned. So much data. He felt a sharp bump beneath his front tyre. and the bike started to wobble. As he always did when he got a puncture, he refused to believe it was really happening, as if the tyre would plug the hole itself or he would ride on and it would miraculously inflate. But it never did, and it didn't this time. He stopped the bike and dismounted, his cleats clattering on the dark road. He looked around. The forest was dense and impenetrable. A carpet of leaves covered the ground. The sun was hidden, and it was cold and gloomy. He pushed the button on the Campagnolo brake lever to relax the brake blocks and undid the quick-release lever. The wheel slipped out and he fell into his practiced routine. He found his tyre levers and levered the bead from the rim. He pulled the tube out and then pulled the tyre from the rim. He ran the tyre through his fingers, looking and feeling for whatever had caused the damage. He found nothing. He rotated it again, more slowly this time, the tips of his fingers gliding over the rubber, searching for a telltale flint or thorn. Still nothing. A voice came from behind him. "You all right, mate?" Jeff turned around. He was a tall, lean man wearing full Rafa Sky kit, a casque helmet, and orange lace-up Giro shoes. He had mirrored Oakley shades, a thin face and a full beard. He was astride a black Pinarello with zip wheels and a full Dura Ace group set. No shortage of money there, thought Jeff. "Need any help?" Jeff looked at him. The shades reflected Jeff's own face. He couldn't see the cyclist's eyes. Where the hell did he come from? Jeff thought. "Have you got a spare tube?" he asked. The cyclist unzipped the bag velcroed to his seat post, removed a tube and held it out. "Thanks," said Jeff. Jeff put the tyre on the rim, seating one side of the bead. "Have you got a pump?" Wordlessly, the cyclist removed his pump from where it was attached to his frame behind the bottle on the down tube and handed it to him. Jeff attached the pump to the valve and pumped a little air into the tube. He pushed the tube onto the rim beneath the tyre and worked it around. He began to roll the tyre onto the rim. The tyre was tight and stiff. The last few inches were always the hardest. Jeff bent over the wheel, rolling the tyre with his thumbs. He pushed his tyre lever into the remaining gap and levered the final section of bead onto the rim. He worked the valve up and down and waggled it to seat it fully in the tyre. The other cyclist reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small CO2 inflator. "Here," he said. Jeff screwed the inflator to the valve and squeezed the trigger on the pump. The icy gas raced through the tube and left white crystals on his fingers. He removed the inflator and handed it back to the cyclist. The tyre was hard and ready. Jeff slipped the wheel into the dropouts and pushed in the button on his Campagnolo brake lever. He collected up the old tube and rolled it tightly and put it in his tool bag together with his tyre levers. "Thanks," he said. "Want a fig roll?" The cyclist thought for a moment. "Ta," he said. Jeff reached into his back pocket and removed 2 fig rolls wrapped in foil. He handed one to the cyclist. They stood together in silence at the sight of the dark, piney forest, leaning against their bikes, the only sound the chomping of dusty fig rolls, as the cloud drifted apart and the hard, bright sun gradually emerged. "Tangfastic," said Jeff. "Don't mind if I do." Jeff reached into his other pocket and pulled out a handful of Haribo Tangfastics. The cyclist took 2, a blue and green one and an orange and yellow one. He bit into them and twisted his lips as the sourness hit his tongue. He took 2 more. "I'll have these later," he said. A group of about 6 cyclists rolled past, all dressed in identical Sky Rafa kits and shiny blue casque helmets, legs pumping on their shiny Pinarellos. A Jaguar XKE followed close behind and rolled to a stop. "Hey, Brad," called the driver. "You coming?" The title of this podcast is Misspoke, Cycling Culture, Cycling and Culture. So it's mostly about cycling, but it's not just about cycling. And I hope you'll find something to interest you, even if it's not specifically cycling related, or even if you're not specifically interested in cycling, although I do accept that it is mostly cycling. Anyway, this particular piece is not cycling. This is called Coronavirus Chronicles. I wrote this at the start of this particular lockdown quarantine period. My son is 19 now. He has long hair and a tattoo, and he spends a long time on his phone and watching YouTube. He's bright and witty and sharp, with a dry sense of humour, and he doesn't take any nonsense from his dad. I like having him around. These are strange times for everyone, and our family is no different. We sit and watch our own TV programmes in our own rooms, or look at our own phones, and come together in the evening to eat. We sit together and we don't listen to the news. We watch Gavin and Stacey, or Fawlty Towers, or The Office, or something else to take our minds off the weirdness. I remember when my son was younger, and we used to do Lego together. Not a great deal, but every Christmas I'd buy a big model, and we'd do it together in the days afterwards. We'd sit at the dining table and empty all the bags of pieces into the box, and then I'd get 2 bowls, a larger one and a smaller one, and set them between us. I'd find the pieces and put a dozen or so at a time into the larger bowl, and then pick out the next piece he needed and put it in the smaller bowl. The instruction booklet would sit between us, and sometimes he'd turn it to see the instructions, and sometimes I'd turn it to see which piece was needed next. Sometimes I'd make a mistake and find the wrong piece and put it in the bowl, and he'd look at it, and then look at the instruction book, and then he'd sigh and say, "Dad," and give me a long, withering look, and I'd say, "Sorry," and then find the right piece. We didn't talk a great deal apart from that. We didn't need to. The closeness and the shared enjoyment was enough. We loved the way the models came together, took shape, from a mass of odd-coloured and shaped bricks into something magical which emerged like a butterfly, into a VW camper van or a Ferrari, a crane, a bulldozer, a Harry Potter castle or a Star Wars death ship. Some of the models took days to complete with thousands of bricks, and when they were finished my son would take them and show his mother. The model would go in his room on a shelf and be gradually forgotten and clogged with dust until the next Christmas, when we'd look through the catalogue together and choose the next one to make. We stopped doing them a few years ago. I don't remember precisely when. It wasn't a specific decision. He didn't say, "Dad, I'm too old for this now." But maybe we both knew when the right time was. He moved on to new things. Long hair and a tattoo and an iPhone and YouTube videos. But he got the highest marks in his school, and I was so proud of him, even though we didn't do the Lego anymore. But now we're in quarantine, and the world has changed, and maybe it's changed forever. My daughter is working from home. She finishes at 5 and we go for a walk together. She has a route she likes, around the block, and we're not allowed to vary it. It's 3 miles along quiet streets. Fairly quiet. Other people seem to like the same route around the block, often with their dogs, and so we veer into the road to avoid them and keep our social distance. I wanted to walk in the road this evening. There are cars, but not many, so it's safe. But she doesn't want to vary the routine, and so we stay on the pavement. She links her arm in mine, and we chat, or not, depending on our mood. And if I talk too much, she tells me to shut up. It's nice. When we got back to the house, she made blondies, because it was my birthday and I liked them. She was worried about the chocolate. It had been in the cupboard for a long time and was out of date. "Don't worry," I said. "They'll be fine." And they were. I spoke to my son. "Do you fancy doing some Lego?" I said, like we used to. "Let me think about it," he said. I hope he says yes. And now for the next chapter of my novella about the Liege Bastogne Liege sportive called The Monument. And if you're interested in reading this, either as a paperback or on your Kindle, you can get it from Amazon. Just search for my name, Julian Hutchings, or put in The Monument and you should find it. To give you a little recap, our intrepid heroes, Clovis and Eric, have gone to Belgium to ride the Liege Bastogne Liege sportive, and we've just arrived on the day of the sportive itself. The day of the sportive. It was cold and a chill wind blew and it was drizzling. "Christ," said Eric, "just what we fucking need." "At least we've got ass savers," said Clovis. "Fat lot of good that'll do us if it rains all day." The forecast says it will," said Clovis, "and there may be sleet too, and hail." "Hail! Christ." They both had leg warmers, shoe covers, full winter gloves, buffs, and for once Eric had a covering on his head beneath his helmet. "I'm cold," he said. "Let's get it over with." They set off and rolled down the wet and winding windy hill. The tyres squelched through the puddles and rivulets of rain flowed down the gutters. It was dark through the trees, and the smell of the wild garlic that peppered the verges assailed their nostrils like an Italian deli. It was 7 miles to the start line, and as they reached the industrial estate by the river, they joined the many hundreds of cyclists heading for the start line. As they got nearer, the side roads were jammed with motorhomes and parked cars, sleepy-looking cyclists sitting on the curb, pulling on their shoes and adjusting their bib straps. Over the start line, and the timing mat beeped to start recording their time. "Let's stay together," said Clovis. "It's safer. Don't want to get stuck with a puncture in this weather in the middle of the Ardennes like a German soldier with a broken rifle." "I'll try," said Eric, hunched over, drips collecting on the end of his nose, and his shoes already filling with water, the rain seeping into his neoprene shoe covers. They rode through the centre of Liege, across the river, and headed out through the bleak suburbs. The roads weren't closed, and they still had to obey the traffic lights, but there were marshals at every junction, and the car drivers were considerate, despite it being a Saturday. The route contained a number of listed climbs, which were recorded on a sticker which they attached to the top tube of their bikes, but there were plenty more that weren't listed as famous climbs, and the road rose and fell for most of the route. The first climb came after about 5 miles, not very steep, but a long drag, and the big groups of cyclists soon spread out into a long line, the young and eager bucks pushing off the front, the slower, older ones, as Clovis and Eric were, soon slipping out the back. Many of the younger riders had made no concession to the weather, and were dressed in shorts and just a jersey. Many had no gloves or shoe covers even. "They're going to suffer like dogs in this weather," said Clovis. "They're Belgians," said Eric. "Hard men. They're used to it. Pure Flandrians, like us." "We're not Flandrians," said Clovis. "We're from Kent." "It's an expression," said Eric. There was an event photographer at the top of the hill, sitting amidst the wind and rain, his camera wrapped in a plastic bag, and Clovis and Eric each raised a hand gingerly from their handlebars and gave a perfunctory wave and tried and failed to smile. They reached the first feed stop. Eric was in front, face set grim, pushing on steadily through the bleak weather like Shackleton across the ice floe. "I need a piss," shouted Clovis. "Piss, I need a piss." But his shout was lost in the wind, and Eric didn't hear. Clovis turned into the feed stop and joined the hundreds of other cyclists milling around the tables of honey cake, bananas, twiglets, cakes, raisins, sweets and energy drink. Clovis grabbed a couple of honey cakes and tore the wrappers off and took a large bite. The honey cake was sweet and dry, and he chewed remorselessly and scraped it off the roof of his mouth with his tongue. The toilets were red, pyramid-shaped, triangular plastic affairs, with a modesty shield at the sides to hide your nakedness. The men stepped up and did their business in the open air as the rain continued to fall. Clovis held his hands in the rain to wash them, and then wiped them on his shorts. His hands had swollen in the cold weather, and that, coupled with his sodden gloves, meant that he struggled to put his gloves back on again. They were soaked through, and he squeezed as much water out as he could before forcing his hands back into them. He sighed and remounted. He waited, gathering his strength. A woman stopped near him, tall, slim, dark-haired, Oakley shades, a bright red rain jacket, and straddling a purple Live bike. "Horrible weather," she said in an American accent. "Isn't it?" he said. "Good luck," she said. "Yeah, you too." He rode off, and she followed shortly afterwards. He increased his pace. The stop had been for no more than 10 minutes, but Eric would have pushed on in his steady way, and he would need to chase to get back to him. Shortly after leaving the feed stop was a long flowing descent for about 2 miles, the open road stretching before him with little traffic. He picked up pace and was soon travelling at well over 35 miles an hour, but he was passed by plenty of other riders, bent low over their handlebars or crouched on the top tube like they'd seen Chris Froome do, teeth bared, water streaming from their fleeting back wheels. A purple bike passed him, and the rider waved. He recognised the woman with the American accent. He chased after her, but she was younger and quicker. Every time he felt he was gaining on her and her distinctive bright red jacket and purple bike, and thought he'd reach her, she seemed to sense him and increased her speed slightly, and he slipped back again. But the chase was fun and took his mind off the horrible weather. He caught Eric a few miles before the next feed stop. "What happened to you?" he said. "Needed a piss," said Clovis. I shouted to you. Why didn't you wait? Couldn't stop, said Eric. I felt like if I stopped I'd get cold and wouldn't want to start again. You going to stop now? Yeah, I need a piss. First one since we started, and I'm starving and cold. Actually, I feel like shit. So do I, said Clovis. The weather still hated them. Heavy, dark clouds hung over everyone like bad news, although the rain had eased slightly and there was now just a steady drizzle. Clovis saw a bright red jacket near the honey cakes. Hi, he said. She turned around. Hi, she said. Sorry, do I know you? Sorry, said Clovis. I saw you at the last feed stop. You said hi. Did I? Sorry, I said hi to a lot of people. Just being friendly. Me too, said Clovis. Weather's a bitch. You're right there, she said. You can say that again. Bitch. Weather's a bitch, said Clovis. What? Oh, I see what you did there. This your first time? Said Clovis. Yeah, she said. Monument Virgin. He laughed. I'm not a monument virgin, he said. No, ma'am. What was the matter with him? He was talking drivel and adopting an American accent like a love-struck schoolboy. I love your humour, she said. Jordan. Sorry, said Clovis. I'm Jordan, she said. That's my name. Oh, sorry, like the shoes. Or the river, Clovis. River Clovis? What's that? Sorry, my fault. I'm Clovis. That's my name. Oh, what's with the river business? Nothing, forget it. Christ, what was the matter with him? Why couldn't he talk like a normal person? Eric came back from the toilet. Who are you talking to? He said. This is my mate Eric, said Clovis. Hi, said Jordan. Hello, said Eric. Gotta go, said Jordan. My friend's waiting, Chrissy. Another woman came over, shorter but also slim and with blonde hair peeking beneath her helmet. She was pushing a Trek bike by the saddle. Snap, said Eric. We've got the same bike. Nice, said Chrissy. You can see mine if I can see yours. You can see mine any time, said Eric. Chrissy winked. See you around, Jordan called to Clovis as they rode off. They seem nice, said Eric. She winked at me. Did you see that? Mind you, don't fancy yours much. What? It's an expression, said Eric. Clovis said, I wonder if two women come across two blokes, like they just did. Whether when they go past, one says to the other, don't fancy yours much. Or is it just men do that? Nah, I bet they do it too. Anyway, Jordan's tasty. Tasty? What is this, 1979? Hot, then. She's hot. I don't think young people say hot now. I do. You're not young. Ready? Righto, said Eric, like a Battle of Britain pilot. As they set off, the clouds cleared to reveal a crisp blue sky and the sun came out and started to dry their sodden clothes. Clovis stopped and took off his gloves and stuffed them in a back pocket. It won't last, said Eric. And so it proved. 20 minutes later the dark clouds rolled in and the sun disappeared and it started to rain, more heavily than before. Clovis stopped and pulled his cold wet gloves over his hands. They were riding through a small town over cobbles when the hail hit. It was sharp, stinging needle hail that repeatedly stabbed at their faces like acupuncture. It's like that Chinese thing with needles, he shouted to Eric over the noise. What, acupuncture? No, heroin. Ow! Shouted Clovis as the hail got heavier and heavier until at last he could stand it no more and pulled off the road to shelter in the lee of a shop awning. Some of the cyclists had stopped too and they huddled together like Shackleton's men in their tents on South Georgia. On the other side of the road were two cyclists huddled in a bus shelter, one wrapped in a shiny aluminium space blanket like a turkey prior to Christmas dinner. Fuck, said Eric. Fuck. Whose big idea was this then? The hailstorm only lasted for a few minutes and then gave way to the same steady rain. We need to be careful, said Clovis. Hypothermia. We mustn't get too cold. I can't feel my fingers, said Eric. If we get a puncture, we're fucked. We need to keep moving, said Clovis. We're almost at La Redoute. La Redoute was the most famous of the climbs on the route. The road ran between some houses and then beside a motorway, and it headed upwards from the start, getting higher and higher until the last section was at over 20%. Motorhomes were densely packed on either side, having been in position for days, ready for the pro race the following day. Tomorrow their inhabitants would mostly be sat outside on fold-up chairs with glasses of wine, if it was dry, waiting for their favourites, but today, in this weather, most were inside in the warm with glasses of wine, their feet up and the TV on. Clovis got into his lowest gear and ground his way to the top. He felt the gasping breathing of a rider on his wheel. After a few bike lengths, the rider nudged Clovis's rear wheel. Clovis stayed upright, but the other rider came down with a gasp and a thump and a shouted expletive. "I ain't turning round," Clovis said to himself, and gritted his teeth and stamped on the pedals until he reached the top at last. Riders were spread over the road, some weeping over their bars, some sprawled on the grass, some triumphant and high-fiving their friends. Clovis waited for his fast-beating heart to slow, then grabbed a swig from his bottle and waited until he saw Eric pushing his bike up the last section. "You okay, mate?" said Clovis. Eric looked at him but didn't respond, just shook his head in dismay. "I hate you," he said at last. "One climb left," said Clovis. "Liar." Another cyclist arrived just behind Eric. Bright red jacket, slim, dark hair on a purple liv, not even out of breath. "Hi, boys," she said. "Jordan," said Clovis. "Imagine meeting you here." "Not really," said Jordan. "We're on the same ride." Chrissy appeared behind Jordan, still slim, still blonde, still on the trek. "Hey," she said. "Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action," said Clovis. "You only live twice," said Jordan. "I love Ian Fleming." "Are we the enemy?" "I don't know," said Clovis. "Are you?" "I hope not," said Jordan. "See you around. Good luck catching us." She and Chrissy rode off at a pace that Clovis and certainly Eric would never match. "What did you mean by that?" said Eric. "What was all that James Bond stuff?" "I wonder," said Clovis. "You don't think it's odd? A couple of hot birds taking an interest in a couple of old geezers like us? Let's face it, you're hardly George Clooney, and neither am I." "Hot birds? You're paranoid," said Eric. "I can be quite charming when I want to be." "It would take more than your charm to pull those two, or even one of them," said Clovis. "Oh well, I don't suppose we'll see them again." They approached a junction with a left turn against the traffic. A group of cyclists arrived at the same time, and they all paused. Clovis saw that the road was clear and slowed down, but did not stop, and readied himself to cross the road. Suddenly a large truck appeared on the left as if from nowhere, and Clovis braked suddenly. He was unable to unclip his left foot in time and toppled over onto his side, his foot still held in the pedal. He was winded, but unhurt except for the damage to his pride. "You okay?" said Eric, reaching down and pulling him to his feet. "I'm all right," said Clovis. The other cyclist looked down at him and, seeing no obvious signs of injury or distress, rode off. As he got to his feet and slowly remounted his bicycle, checking as he did so for any signs of damage, a blue Skoda drove past on the opposite side of the road. There was one major climb left on the route, apart from all the other climbs they still had to conquer, which were tough but didn't even merit a mention on the sticker, and that was La Roche-au-Faucon. A quiet road through a small wooded valley turned into the suburbs, took a sharp right, and seemed to go straight upwards before a bend, another right turn, and up again, and then again, and again. Once again Clovis made it to the top, still huffing, still puffing, still swearing, but without unclipping, and he made it to the top, and once again Eric nearly did, but walked the last 50 metres. "All downhill now," said Eric. "No, it isn't," said Clovis. The last few miles wound through the university quarter, a long residential street lined with expensive-looking houses. The rain stopped and the sun appeared and dried the roads and riders, and Clovis, warmed up a bit, swept along with all the other finishers, picking up pace and driving on until they reached the centre of Liege, where the traffic pooled. The traffic lights interrupted their progress, and the Saturday afternoon drivers sought to impede their way. Drifting through the cars, Clovis kept Jordan's bright red jacket, was it really her, in view and in his mind all the time, until he and Eric finally crossed the finish line together and raised their arms triumphantly, and a pretty young marshal in shorts came up to them and hung medals around their necks. "We did it," said Clovis. "Yeah," said Eric, "never again." They didn't hang around at the finish. It was too cold and there was nothing to do except eat greasy chips and burgers of questionable provenance or drink beer in the grey afternoon. The ride back to the house was uneventful, and they seemed to find their second wind as they managed it quite easily, and the hill they dreaded passed without incident. "I need a bath," said Clovis. "Me too," said Eric. "Not together," said Clovis. Finally, clean and dried and warmer, they sat in the living room with their feet on the coffee table and a huge bowl of crisps between them, and steadily munched their way through them. "We did it," said Clovis. "Yep, just about. What about dinner?" There's a restaurant in the village. Let's go there. We can walk. I want to get pissed. And if you want to find out whether Clovis and Eric ever meet Jordan and Chrissy again, you'll have to tune in to the next stage in the Misspoke podcast. We're going to finish this stage of the podcast with another extract from My Life in Bikes, and this has reached the heady heights of Titanium in 2014, Van Nicholas. Titanium was where it was at. Everyone knew that. Titanium was compliant, it was comfortable, it had give, and it would last forever, long after the monkeys had left Gibraltar, and the British too. Long after the plastic that clogged the sea had degraded, titanium bikes would still be going strong. I read that somewhere. A friend had a Van Nicholas, and their website was seductive. They only made titanium bikes, so they must know what they were doing, and the pictures were nice and drew you in. I was sold. And titanium was what, exactly? A metal, I knew that much. But was it a composite like tin or copper, or was it bronze that was tin and copper? Or was that brass? What was brass, anyway? And why didn't they make bikes out of brass or bronze? Who knew? So I ordered it. It came in a box, and still the excitement hadn't worn off. It was bare metal, titanium presumably, and it looked strong. I'd gone Shimano Ultegra for a change. So I now had SRAM, Campagnolo and Shimano on different bikes. And when I went out for a ride, I often got confused and tried to double tap when I should push, or my thumb flapped around uselessly looking for the Campag downshifter, which wasn't there. Life. I went for a ride and it was nice, don't get me wrong, but it didn't feel that different or that special. But I was going to ride the Tour of Flanders, and surely that was the bike for the cobbles. Well, yes and no. For one thing, I was unused to the cobbles, and so probably would have struggled whatever bike I rode. And also there isn't a bike that has been made which will absorb those cobbles. But it looked good, which is half the battle, although I'm not sure which half. You've been listening to Stage 13 of Misspoke, a cycling podcast going out during this period of coronavirus, pandemic, lockdown, quarantine, whatever you want to call it. Make sure you tune in again to Stage 14, and in the meantime I hope you and your family are getting through this coronavirus pandemic without too many problems. Take care and see you next time.